This is The Big Breakdown, a long look back at some of the biggest stories we're covering for you at the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today. This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.
We spent a lot of time talking about the tragic death of Sandra Birchmore. What happened, who was involved, and how a promising young woman was allegedly groomed, manipulated, and ultimately murdered by someone who should have been protecting her. But today, we're going to step back, not away from Sandra, but deeper into her story, because there's a version of this where Sandra doesn't die, and a version where we still have a victim. We just don't have a headline. See, for every Sandra Birchmore whose story ends in a crime scene and a federal indictment, there are countless others whose stories end quietly, behind closed doors, in therapy sessions, in marriages they never wanted, in isolation, in confusion, in guilt. Survivors of grooming and coercive control don't always get a trial or a criminal case. Most get silence or worse, self-blame. That's what this conversation is about. What happens when the abuse doesn't end in death, but in decades of emotional fallout? What happens when the predator walks free and the victim is left trying to rebuild a sense of self from the rubble of manipulation? We're joined again by psychotherapist Siobhan Scott. And this time we're asking, what does survival actually look like? How does shame embed itself into someone who was groomed and thinks the abuse was love? And how does someone wake up 10 or 20 years later and finally realize that wasn't care, that was control? It's not an easy conversation, but it's a necessary one, because the aftermath of abuse isn't just something survivors get over. It's something they carry, sometimes forever. And the more we understand that, the better we will be at spotting these patterns and maybe stopping them before they turn fatal. Let's talk about some of the long-term effects of survivors on something like this. Obviously, she was a survivor until she was murdered. But there's a lot of people out there who go through the abuse and survive, and their abusers, drift off into life somewhere else. Let's talk about the effects that survivors of this type of exploitation carry if they escape the relationship but never see justice served. What are they looking at in that world?
I think if it's someone that gets insight, let's say they turn 25, they get out of that relationship, and then they look back, I think they most often blame themselves. And that's a very common theme. And if there has been abusive sex, which there was in this case, apparently he was very kinky and had the paraphilias, and even when she was in her 20s, he would have her role play a 13-year-old, and she went along with these things, violent fantasies. They feel shame, they feel guilt, and they blame themselves for it. And sometimes there's some PTSD symptoms of trauma, and they have trouble relating normally to normal men in relationships. It can haunt them.
We recently learned that Farwell was not the father of Sandra's unborn child. That's an interesting angle to this. It certainly doesn't change the charges, because at the time, he believed he was. Mm-hmm. I think she believed he was. Mm-hmm. There's no evidence to point that she was trying to gaslight him or make something up. She, I think, legitimately thought that he was the father of the child. Obviously, he's not. So it kind of tells us, who else is there that's out there in this orbit? Are we ever going to hear from who the hell that was? And it does make me wonder, maybe a paternity test should be done for every officer in the Canton Police Department over there.
That was my thought. Yeah. I would look at everybody. Yeah.
It's, like you don't know who or where or what. Because I would guess you're going to find some interesting things and a lot of people that don't want information coming out. Is it common for predators to show like surface level affection or protection towards their victims. The victims have to believe they're being cared for in some way, shape, or form.
100%.
So what
100%.
what are some of the things, if someone is looking at their world, whether they're the 15, 18, 20 some year old, whatever it may be, questioning some relationships in their life, or the parent that is involved in that child's life, unlike I think a lot of the situation here with Sandra, but who is seeing, this is kind of odd, what's going on over here? What are some of those things to look for? And maybe some of those men who are a little bit too old to be hanging around, the 18-year-old or the 15-year-old in any setting.
Yeah, always looking for that power imbalance in age. You see it with people who have wealth, and they start bestowing gifts, ridiculous gifts on someone. But I think the biggest one is the flattery and the continual message that this younger woman is special in some way. And that's, I think, what really appeals to their ego. But whenever you see an older male paying lots of attention with gifts or flattery, or, here's a special trip for you. We can even, turn this to Michael Jackson and the way it's reported, I think, with a lot of credibility, that he groomed vulnerable boys and made them feel special and showered them with gifts. It's like red flag, red flag, red flag.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Farwell's no Michael Jackson, but it doesn't take necessarily money, and it doesn't take exorbitant things to achieve that, especially if you're coming from a world with not a whole lot of anything. If he's taking you out to McDonald's, if he's just showing you little bits of attention that others would look at and go, that's all the attention you get. But to someone who doesn't have any of that in their life, they're just trying to grasp for any bit of it they can get. And that's got to be confusing.
Very confusing. And they are in such internal pain and loneliness and feeling, unloved. And so a little bit of nurturing goes a very long way for them.
Especially when you get to the area of protector versus predator. Because if no one wants to look at a relationship and go, hey, my lover's a predator, they're going to want to see that person as a protector. And when you're that age and you've had that sort of grooming your whole life, I mean, obviously Sandra was murdered, but to come to that realization, let's say she stayed alive, do victims of this ever kind of come around to see it that way? I mean, obviously some do, but is that more common than not? Do a lot of people just kind of continue on with life, either with that predator that is now their protector, more so just their controller, or how does one kind of pull themselves out of that? Because it would require kind of realigning everything in your world, because your compass would be completely, basically remanufactured if you come to that conclusion of the person you're with.
I think the majority, it takes a long time, and often until they get into middle age and are sort of doing that reflecting on their life that we all tend to do in middle age, looking back at our history and deciding where we want to go in the future. It's one time that a lot of people go to therapy to try to focus in and say, gee, where were my missteps here? And that's, I think, when the majority can start to reflect and look at the history of relationships. And, another one that comes up, I remember a teacher when I was in 7th grade who gave me lots of extra attention and really commented inappropriately on my appearance. I mean, I look back at it now and, oh my gosh, every red flag goes off. But when I was in 7th grade, I really liked him. He made me feel good. He made me feel special. So I think it takes, a lot of time and wisdom and looking back over our histories before we see it.
These groups like this, it's one thing when it's the police and it's the Explorers program. They can control the narrative pretty good because they are the police. But there's all sorts of groups out there that we hear all the time. And so in this group is involved with doing things to children. And obviously it happens all of the time. And a lot of these people have no past record. It's, I mean, it doesn't mean they didn't do anything. It means so that they probably haven't been caught doing it. They really had a system around it. But when you have that sort of a situation, people do what they can. Hopefully, a lot of organizations don't even run background checks on people that are hanging out with children or involved with them. But the ones that do, nothing comes up.
They may not find it. Yeah.
And if you don't have that, then it becomes a gut thing. Then you got to take a look at who you're hiring, who's coming in, and who's going to be acting certain ways around children. How do we better recognize these signs of grooming and emotional abuse before it ends in tragedy?
That is one of the insidious things, is that the people who are good at this present wonderfully. And I mean, again, the churches, Boy Scouts, teachers in many cases. It seems like every week there's a horror story about a teacher, some of them women now. It's how to see red flags when there's nothing in the history. And I think probably the majority of cases, there's nothing in the history. My gosh, would in-depth psychological testing catch some of it? Maybe, but that would cost, you're looking at large-scale psych testing of every police officer, probably not economically feasible. But in an ideal world, we would take a very close look at anybody who's unmonitored around children. Doctors, we can think of the doctor that was, the Olympic doctor and molested all the gymnasts for years. It's like these people know how to present as pillars of society.
If we were to do that, I mean, obviously, yes, there's so many things that are prohibitive of it. We don't have enough people to probably execute these tests.
We do not.
And carry them out, number one. Number two, the cost of it, and I hate that, but that's the world. But let's just theoretically say that we were able to do in-depth psychological testing on all these people in power. Do you think we'd be surprised by how many people wouldn't pass the test?
I would guess we would be surprised. Yeah. I know that they do testing for nuclear plants and for good reason. I don't know the percentage of people that they rule out, but they do rule a significant number out. They should do it for correctional officers. They should do it for law enforcement officers. And I think a lot would be filtered out. A lot of law enforcement people who apply for law enforcement jobs are filtered out. But, again, it's not through the kind of in-depth psychological testing that I think would catch more.
In your experience, we get the victim here who committed suicide or murder staged as a suicide. But there's a lot of people who that's not how it ends. They end up by themselves, isolated. Their abuser maybe stays, maybe goes. How do you handle that as a psychotherapist when somebody comes to you? Maybe they've made a maybe not even they haven't made a realization. They just know something's wrong in their life. How do you help someone like a Sandra Birchmore if she came to you to see what was going on in their world? I can't imagine it's a quick wake up, look at the world. I mean, it's got to be a couple steps in before to allow them to see that.
Yeah, helping them feel safe, being that heart-to-heart connection where they feel accepted, where they feel understood, and then gradually going over, I like to do that with all my clients, going over a timeline of their lives. What were the good points? What were the not so good points? What was pivotal in your development, and then kind of trying to connect all the dots with where you are today. And often at that point, you can get some insight from them when they look back at their relationship history. And ultimately, these kind of grooming predatory relationships, most of the time they don't end well. They end with someone being hurt in some way, being cast off, maybe after they've had several children with that person, and helping them have compassion for themselves and have empathy for themselves and see that they deserved better than what they got in life thus far. And then, of course, helping them build a support system. Sometimes, there are groups for women who have had a lot of trauma in the past, and that can really be a thing that helps.
If if that one, that conversation and what Siobhan was talking about there didn't hit yet, go back and listen again, because what she was laying out there isn't just a theory. It's the lived experiences of thousands of people. Women, men who've survived grooming, exploitation, and psychological abuse that the world either didn't see or didn't want to see. What happened to Sandra Birchmore didn't start with murder. It started with validation, with attention, with a man in a uniform telling a vulnerable girl that she was special. And that's the formula. Find someone isolated, offer them something they've been starving for, love, purpose, protection, and then twist it. That's how predators work. And the worst part, the grooming is so effective that when the manipulation becomes abuse, the victim still thinks it's love. Siobhan said something that stuck with me in there, that predators often present as protectors. And that's the real horror here. It's not the monsters in the dark. It's the ones smiling at you in the daylight. The ones who look safe, respected, put together. Those are the ones who slip through every background check, the ones who pass every character reference, the ones who know exactly how to hide. And when victims survive those relationships, they're not always vindicated. Sometimes they're dismissed. Sometimes they're blamed. Sometimes they're so conditioned, they don't even recognize what happened until middle age, or if ever. So if you're listening to this and wondering, why didn't she say something sooner, or why didn't she just leave? You missed the point. She did speak and no one listened. She tried to leave, and he allegedly killed her. This isn't just about Sandra Birchmore. It's about the cycle, about the pattern, about the systems, the people who let this happen. And if we don't talk about what survival really looks like, then we're just waiting for the next Sandra and the next.
This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.
The death of Sandra Birchmore wasn't just a tragedy. It was a systematic failure years in the making. A 23-year-old pregnant woman, Sandra, was found dead in her Canton, Massachusetts apartment in 2021. Yeah, that Canton. The official line? Suicide. Case closed. Except now, years later, that ruling has unraveled. Federal prosecutors have indicted former Stoughton police officer Matthew Farwell for her murder, alleging a long-term pattern of grooming, manipulation, and control that began when Sandra was just 15 years old. Under the badge, inside a police mentorship program meant to protect kids like her. But Farwell wasn't the only officer in her orbit. Because could the police in this area fail more people en masse? Others, his twin brother, a school resource officer, even a deputy chief. These are all different people. His brother, a school resource officer, and a deputy chief. More people. It's not all the same person. Those are multiple people, all in the same orbit of passing this girl who, at the age of 15, started in the Police Explorer program, eventually turned into an adult. Matthew started violating her under the age of 18, and then the others just thought, well, we've heard such good reviews. It's insane. This is insane. But this is how these people acted. And only one has charges against them. They've been named in civil suits and post-commission hearings, and while none of them have been criminally charged other than the one, their quiet resignations, expired certifications, and institutional silence speaks volumes. It's a story that goes beyond one predator and begins to look a lot more like a culture of rape. What's going on here? You get a young girl in an Explorer program. And I'm questioning all of this. Because from what we understand, the other three men who have had no charges against them, their physical connections with Sandra happened after 18. Farwell's is alleged to have happened younger. That's what makes that statutory rape. How did this all happen? A network of men who circled a vulnerable teen for years, knowing they could bend the law without ever breaking it outright, without anybody ever catching them, because they are the law, right? So what really happened here? How do predators weaponize institutions designed to protect? And why didn't anyone intervene when Sandra tried to speak up? And what does it say when multiple officers involved in one young girl's life all disappear quietly? No charges, no statements, no accountability. We're about to jump into an interview with Robin Dreeke. Before we do, though, I want you to do one thing for me. Please do hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this, if it's on the podcast platform. But I'd really like it if you went to our YouTube channel, Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Just search for that and comment on this story and let me know what you think. See, if you're out there in the podcast world right now, driving around later tonight, whenever, go to our YouTube channel and let us hear your thoughts. And if you're there right now, please, fill it out. Let us know what your thoughts are, and let's have a conversation about this case. I'd really love if you can do that. So, to help us break all of this down, Robin Dreeke, retired FBI special agent, but he's not just a retired FBI special agent. He was the chief of the FBI's counterintelligence behavioral analysis program. Yeah. He brings decades of experience analyzing power dynamics, behavioral manipulation, and what happens when an entire system enables abuse. I asked him to help us understand the psychology at work, not just in the abuser, but in the culture that lets him operate so unchecked. So let's start here. When the people tasked with protecting the vulnerable become the ones exploiting them, how do you even begin to dismantle that?
Yeah, I think it's a clear case, again, innocent until proven guilty of just using a position of power and authority to gratify his sexual needs. I think it's just purely that control, sex, and just abusing someone who's vulnerable. And they're using the platform of the Explorer program, which is a great idea, great concept, when it's executed well by healthy individuals that are going to be put in those places of authority to interact with youth who are at a critical stage of development in their lives. They're looking for stability. They're looking for safety. They're looking for structure. They're looking for a path forward in life, to do something exciting, do something of service. And this one individual destroyed that.
Completely. It's one of those things where we're looking at this going, okay, Farwell is arrested. He's been charged. He's the one who we know had relations with her before she was 18, starting at 15. There's some other officers who have not been charged with anything because they allegedly, as far as we know, were having relations with her after she turned 18. So it was technically legal. But you look at the system, and these guys, a lot of them knew her well before that. You have a school resource officer being one of them. You have his brother being one of them. And God knows who else, who we don't know about, that was one of them. And they all not kindly, but silently just kind of, drifted off into the ether. One resigned. I think they both resigned from their positions and just or one of them also let their credentials lapse in terms of being renewed. And now they're just out there, not saying a word about it. Technically, what they did, as long as it was after they were 18 and it was consensual, was legal under the eyes of the law. But the creepy factor of this here is it seems like a lot of these guys were looking at her in this Explorer program when she was a child and then ended up going obviously much further when she became an adult. Is there, unless you can prove that they did anything with her under the age of 18, is there any recourse for this? Is there anything that these guys can be charged with? Or is it just it's kind of a sick thing? It's just a sick demonstration of behavior. There's always creepy guys out there that go after women that are far too young for them. But this one just has a different layer of darkness to it.
Yeah, I don't know about the legal aspect of it, whether they can still go after him or not, especially if she's of legal age. I'm not thinking so. When you talk about that layer of creepiness too, I want to first caveat that the very vast majority of law enforcement doesn't do this.
Sure.
But there are cases. Matter of fact, I personally know of cases in law enforcement and in departments where, unfortunately, you have a very, very male-dominated environment, and they will prey on women, and they will. It sound crass. They'll pass them around sometimes.
God.
Where someone comes in with a reputation, whether it's another law enforcement officer themselves or someone affiliated with the department in some way and gets a reputation, and these creepy degenerates will pass these women around, and it's a cabal of unhealthy, crazy, narcissistic self-gratification behavior by everyone involved. They prey on someone who's vulnerable psychologically, and then they're going to just do these horrendous things. And I'm at a loss for words most times and thinking about how deplorable it is.
Yeah. When the whispers started about Farwell's illicit relationship with Sandra, there was no internal investigation. Instead, those that were aware, like other officers, quietly blew out the candle. Some left the department, others let certifications lapse. That culture of silence helped bury the case until federal agents intervened years later. Is this something, I mean, it's just pure speculation here, but when you have a department that's cool enough to, and I'm not saying cool enough in a good way, I'm saying in their own weird way of thinking, well, we're going to kind of let you pass over here. But they're, I guess, chill enough that they don't go and investigate this. They don't raise a red flag. They don't go, that none of this is okay. You can't just, disappear from this. That's a culture. That's not just one person that's trying to slowly slip into the silence. That's other people going, okay, we'll let you pass. What does that say? Does that mean other people could be involved in this that we don't know about? Does that just say, look, I got your back here because you got my back there? I mean, it's obviously there's that solid line of blue that can exist in some departments. What do you think is happening here? I mean, this is a department. It's Canton PD. Again, we're back here. We're back in near Karen land.
Yes.
And this is what a lot of people had issues with in the Karen trial. They would look at this. They were trying to even bring some of this evidence into the trial, but they did not, of showing a pattern of bad behavior, of covering things up. And this is not the Karen Reed case. And I think the two stand very differently on their own. But again, we got that culture going on where things kind of, we can do weird things and nobody's going to question us. What are your thoughts on how this is working out over there and what needs to change if it hasn't already?
So here's what's going on behaviorally. Anytime we see horrendous, chaotic things, we just got to slow down. We'll break it down behaviorally and take a look. So first, let's go back to motivations of all human beings that are designated Homo sapiens, us. We are genetically and biologically coded to act in our own best interests in terms of our safety, security, and prosperity, according to what we think that is. We're always going to act in terms of our safety. And so if we're looking at people's actions, we always have to then assess and assume that the actions they're taking are actions they're taking that they think from their perspective, from their context, using that deep empathy we talk about. In other words, walk in their shoes. They're acting in their best interest and what they think is going to keep them safe. So when people are acting outside of the norms of standard human behavior and ethically and morally, that means that there's a lever of influence over them of fear, because people will act and take actions based on fear. So in situations like this, where people are doing these sorts of actions, getting away with these sorts of actions, and then moving away from, in these cases, like silently trying to resign and get out, there's at least one individual from a higher point that has a lever of fear over people that are going to speak out. And so anytime I see situations like this, I'm going to start poking and looking and examining who is in a position of influence over everyone else that can use a lever of fear for people underneath. And so that's where I'm looking first. And so it comes down to me. The greatest things you can do in a situation like this is who's leading, because it's that leadership someplace, and it could be a position of title and authority, or it could be just a position of influence because of that personality trait that it puts them in that position that gives them that lever of fear over others.
That conversation there lays bare with Robin Dreek what most of us already felt in our gut. Sandra Birchmore's death wasn't just the result of one bad cop. It was the product of a broken culture. A culture where power shields the predator, where silence is rewarded, and where even after someone dies, the institutions responsible retreat into legal gray areas, quietly hoping it all just fades away. Nothing to see here, everybody. Robin's breakdown of fear-based behavioral compliance is especially chilling. When people start acting against their ethical compass, when they ignore abuse or resign rather than speak up, it usually means someone above them is pulling strings with a lever made of fear. Whether that's positional authority or social influence, the effect is the same. Good people go quiet, and predators stay protected. What Robin described about the psychology of those in charge created an ecosystem of fear and silence is the kind of analysis that hits harder than a court document, because it's not just about who committed the crime, it's about who allowed it to go unchallenged, who benefited from the silence, and who will keep doing it if systems aren't radically changed. But here's where what sticks with me most. Okay? Sandra Birchmore didn't just fall through the cracks. She was punished. She was pushed by a structure that looked official, looked credible, looked protective, but was quietly rotting underneath. And now that we know, now that we see it for what it is, the question becomes how many other Sandras are out there, still being isolated, still being gaslit, and still passed around under the guise of mentorship. Mentorship doesn't come out of your zipper, assholes. Robin's message is clear. Abuse doesn't thrive in darkness. It thrives in silence. And if we want to stop this cycle, we have to stop looking away. Until next time. Let me know what your thoughts are in that comment section about this case. On YouTube, search Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Maybe that's where you are. Maybe that's where you're watching this. Great. Let your voice be heard, please. There's no wrong statements out there. So please do that. And if you want to start commenting on all of our cases, all of our stories before everybody else, you can become a premium subscriber of ours on YouTube. It's all brand new. And then you get access to the videos as we make them. So days, weeks, sometimes ahead of their release, everything we make as we publish and put it out there into the schedule, you get it immediately. So that gives you first dibs at having your voice heard on all of those pieces. So we got a lot out there that we discuss. So please do check that out, and it helps support the channel as well. Let your voice be heard, though. There's no cost for that, no matter what. Looking forward to hearing it. Until next time, for all of us here at True Crime Today and the Hidden Killers podcast, my name is Tony Bruschi. We will talk again real soon.
Want to stay on top of the latest true crime cases? Press subscribe now and never miss a breaking update from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.